Stephanie White was pissed. Stephanie White was pissed right there, right? So from that point on, now we're going to go here. Now we're going to go here, guys. You see right here, Caitlin Clark is right here. She's been subbed out of the game. That's why she's standing. The players that are sitting are the ones in the game. This means Stephanie White snatched her out of the game after one turnover.
She stood in the huddle. She listened. She put her hands on her hips. Then she just walked away. No trainer at her side, no medical staff jogging behind her, no towel draped over her shoulders. Caitlin Clark, the most famous basketball player on the planet right now, walked off the floor of a tied WNBA game and disappeared down a tunnel by herself. And the broadcast had nothing to tell us. Not for 1 minute, not for 10, not for 30, just silence. And in that silence, a question started spreading across every sports timeline in America. Did Caitlin Clark actually leave that game because of her back? Or did something else happen on that Indiana Fever bench that nobody in the building wanted to put on record? Let's rewind to the moment everything started feeling strange. Phoenix Mercury at Indianapolis, Gainbridge Fieldhouse packed to the rafters, cameras on every angle. And in the second quarter, with about 6 minutes left on the clock, Clark goes up for a three, gets fouled by Valeriana Yayi, lands awkwardly, hits the floor hard, and gets up rubbing her lower back. That's the clip everybody keeps replaying. That's the clip the team eventually pointed to as the moment her back went bad. But here's where the official story starts running into trouble. Because after that fall, Clark didn't limp off. She didn't grab a heating pad. She didn't get pulled aside by a trainer. She kept playing. And not just playing through it for a possession or two. She played the rest of the second quarter at full speed. She came out for the third quarter still on the floor. She facilitated the offense. She drained a deep three. She made cuts. She defended. For nearly 12 full game minutes after that supposed injury moment, she looked like the same Caitlin Clark she'd been all night. That's not how back injuries usually work for professional athletes. When a player's back actually goes, you see it instantly. The shoulders drop, the gait changes, the shooting form gets cautious. Coaches call timeouts, trainers walk on the court, somebody puts a hand on the player's lower spine. None of that happened here. So either Caitlin Clark has a tolerance for pain that borders on superhuman, or the back tweak in the second quarter wasn't actually the reason she ended up walking off in the third. And once you start looking at the third quarter sequence, a very different story starts coming into focus. Here's what unfolds. Score tied at 67. Clark gets the ball at the top of the key, defended by Sammy Whitcomb. She tries to make a play. The ball gets knocked loose. The Mercury picks it up, and Clark doesn't sprint back. She trots. One single moment of slow defense, and on the Indiana bench, head coach Stephanie White goes off. Not a quiet conversation with an assistant, not a calm signal to a substitute. She launches off the bench. Her face is tight, her arms are flying, her voice carries even through the arena noise. To anyone watching the body language, that's not a coach concerned about a player's health. That's a coach who is furious about a defensive lapse in a tied game and has decided in that exact second that her star player is coming out, and she came out immediately. Watch what happens during the timeout that followed. This is the part that has people online refusing to buy the back injury explanation. Clark is standing inside the huddle, not sitting on the end of the bench, not getting examined, not stretching, not icing anything. She's standing with her teammates, listening to White's instructions. And then, mid-huddle, she just turns and walks down the tunnel toward the locker room, alone. No trainer next to her, no medical personnel signaling for the cart, no staff member following with her gear. Compare that with what happens in literally every other professional basketball game on the planet when a star player exits with a real injury. In the NBA, the WNBA, college ball, anywhere, the protocol is the same. A trainer walks with the player, the bench medical staff is notified, the broadcast crew gets an immediate update through league channels, the arena announcer often acknowledges it. There is a visible chain of communication. Here, none of those links existed. Clark walked into the tunnel like she was heading to the parking lot.
Here, watch this. I don't think she was hurt like that. I think her ass got benched and pulled by Stephanie White because it's nonsense going on. Pay attention.
Fever. Well, the consistency that Phoenix is looking for, but let's look at this. Take a look at Caitlin Clark. How deep
that is Caitlin Clark hitting the three.
She is when she comes off that screen.
That's Caitlin Clark hitting the three. Now, this is...
And then came the silence. The broadcasters had nothing. The sideline reporter had nothing. For 30 minutes of real time during the game, there was no official word on what had happened to the biggest star in women's basketball. 30 minutes. In an era when team PR staff send injury notes within 90 seconds of a player exiting, the lack of a statement isn't a small detail. It's the loudest signal in the building. Either nobody in the Fever organization actually knew why their franchise player had just walked off, or they were trying to figure out how to explain it. Eventually, late in the third quarter, the team released an in-game update calling it a back injury. By then, the speculation had already taken root online, and not the wild kind, the kind that comes from people who watch a lot of basketball and know what an injury exit is supposed to look like. There's a reason this particular incident hit the way it did. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened on top of a pattern that's been quietly building all season between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. Reports claim the two have had multiple moments of friction since White took over as head coach. Earlier in the season, after a loss to the Portland Fire, a viral clip caught the two of them in what observers called an emotive exchange on the bench. The video, only about half a minute long, showed White giving forceful instructions during a timeout and Clark responding by putting her arms up in the air. White then waved Raven Johnson off the bench to check in. Johnson took Clark's seat. Clark stood up and watched the rest of the huddle from a few feet away. To anyone watching, it looked like the kind of moment where a player and a coach were not exactly on the same page. Both later downplayed it. White said she was challenging a player, and that's what coaching is. Clark called it two competitive people who both want to win. They both insisted the moment died right there. But the clip went everywhere, and it planted a seed that says maybe the relationship between the Fever's franchise star and her head coach has more friction in it than the official press conferences want to admit. It's worth taking a beat to talk about what makes coaching Caitlin Clark genuinely complicated. At Iowa, Clark had freedom, total freedom. She could pull up from 30 feet. She could throw cross-court passes that her teammates weren't expecting. She could play through mistakes, and her coaches let her cook. That's the environment that turned her into a generational talent. Stephanie White's coaching philosophy reportedly leans more structured. She wants execution within a system. She holds players accountable in real time, often with a quick hook after a single mental mistake. With most rosters, that approach works. It builds discipline. But with a player like Clark, who thrives on rhythm and confidence and being trusted to work through things on the floor, that style can create the kind of tension you can see leaking out in moments like the one we just watched. Rumors suggest that this dynamic, the freedom Clark is used to versus the structure White wants to impose, has been an undercurrent in the locker room for weeks. None of that has been confirmed publicly, and both sides have said the right things in front of cameras. But the smoke keeps showing up, and people are starting to ask where the fire is. Now layer in what the Phoenix Mercury were doing to Clark all night, because this is where the story gets even tangled. Earlier in that same second quarter, before any back tweak, Clark went down for a loose ball. Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas was on top of her, and television replays caught Thomas pressing her fist into Clark's throat while Clark was lying on her back on the floor. No foul was called in the moment. The arena didn't see it live, but the broadcast showed it. White said she heard about it at halftime, brought it to the officials, and was told the crew didn't see it. Then later in the game, that Ayayi foul on the three-point attempt. Two physical hits, one a non-basketball act that the WNBA later reviewed and suspended Thomas for, the other a foul that left Clark grabbing her back. So already, before the third quarter benching, Clark had been put on the floor twice in a single half by Phoenix players, and one of those incidents was severe enough to draw a league suspension after the fact.
The Fever's front office had to be processing all of that in real time. The optics of leaving Clark out there in a game that physical were brutal. The optics of pulling her also looked rough. There was no clean way for the coaching staff to handle the situation, and the way it ended up being handled has only fueled more questions.
Post-game, Stephanie White went scorched earth on the officials. She called the no call on the throat incident egregious. She called it absolutely unacceptable. She said the Fever have a generational talent and a WNBA superstar who had 2 cheap shots that weren't called. She pointed to free throw numbers that told a brutal story. The Mercury shot 26 of 33 from the line as a team. The Fever shot 18 of 19. She made it very clear on the record that she does not believe Caitlin Clark is being officiated the same way as the rest of the league, which is a real statement. It's also a statement that conveniently shifts the entire post-game narrative away from any internal Fever drama and onto the league office and the referees. That doesn't mean White is wrong about the officiating. The throat fist incident really did get reviewed and really did result in Thomas getting suspended a game, so her complaint had merit. But the timing of that media blitz, hours after Clark walked off the floor unaccompanied, also did the job of moving the conversation off the bench and onto the stripes. Whether that was intentional or just how it played out, it's worth noting. Then Jason Whitlock weighed in, and the speculation went full mainstream. The veteran journalist posted that Stephanie White mysteriously sat Caitlin at the end of the second quarter, and that Caitlin Clark mysteriously exited the game midway through the third, and that somebody had some explaining to do. That single post lit a fuse. Within hours, sports media outlets were running stories under headlines that called the benching mysterious. Fans were stitching together side-by-side clips of the Q2 hook, the Q3 hook, and the bench tension from the Portland game. Threads on social media were pulling up every previous moment from the season where Clark had been pulled quickly after a mistake. A whole timeline started taking shape, and the official explanation that this was just a back injury flare-up from a hard foul started looking thin in comparison. Now, to be fair, plenty of credible reporters have stuck with the back injury angle. They've pointed out that Clark has been dealing with back issues for most of the 2026 season. They've noted the physical play in that specific game. They've laid out a perfectly reasonable medical story. But the speculation hasn't gone away, and the reason it hasn't gone away is the way it looked when she walked off. The eyeball test broke the official narrative. Here's the part of the story the team can actually point to. Clark has, in fact, been on the injury report for back issues all season long. She missed a game against the Portland Fire on May 20th because of the same back problem, getting ruled out shortly before tip-off. Since that game, she's appeared on every single Fever injury report listed as probable with a back designation. 13 straight reports. And here's a detail that doesn't get enough attention. The NBA actually warned the Fever about improper injury reporting earlier in the season because the team wasn't getting Clark's back status onto reports on time. So the back injury isn't fiction. It's a real, documented issue that the league office has had reason to ask the Fever about. The question isn't whether Clark has a sore back. The question is whether the sore back was the actual reason she walked off in the third quarter of that Phoenix game, or whether the sore back became the convenient public-facing explanation for something else entirely. Both could be true. A player can be dealing with chronic back pain and also be frustrated enough with a coaching decision to decide her night is over. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they might be exactly how this kind of situation actually unfolds in real life. Then Saturday came. The Fever announced Clark was out against the Los Angeles Sparks. No timetable to return. Stephanie White told reporters that Clark was doing all right, that long-term health and wellness were the priority, and that the team had no real indication of when she'd be back. Convenient timing in one sense, because after Saturday, the Fever don't play again until July 5th, giving Clark more than a week of rest no matter what. Some are reading that as the team using a natural break in the schedule to let things cool down on multiple fronts at once. Whether that's accurate or not, the schedule absolutely lined up to give the Fever some breathing room, and breathing room is something this organization clearly needs right now. Take a step back and look at what the Indiana Fever are actually trying to navigate this season. They went from being a struggling franchise with low attendance and almost no national coverage to being the center of the sports universe in roughly 12 months. Their arena is sold out.
Their road games are sold out. Their television numbers are breaking records that nobody thought women's basketball would break in this generation. Their franchise valuation has reportedly skyrocketed. Corporate sponsors who never paid attention to the WNBA are now competing for partnerships. And all of that, every single bit of it, sits on the shoulders of one 24-year-old guard. That's an enormous amount of weight for any one player to carry, and it's an enormous amount of pressure for any one front office to manage. The Fever weren't built for this kind of spotlight. They're learning on the fly. And every time something like this Phoenix game incident happens, you can see them learning in public, in front of millions of eyeballs, and not always handling it cleanly.
Compare how Indiana is managing this moment to how other contending WNBA teams handle their stars. The Las Vegas Aces have established a clear public chain of communication around A'ja Wilson. The New York Liberty have it dialed in with Breanna Stewart. There's mutual respect. Decisions get made internally and explained externally with the same story from every voice in the organization. When something goes wrong, everybody's reading from the same page. With Indiana, that doesn't appear to be the case yet. Coaching staff says one thing, the player's body language says another. Social media catches the gap. And the gap is what fuels every conspiracy theory and every speculative thread that pops up after a game like this one. What makes the whole situation more delicate is who actually has leverage here. Stephanie White was hired to build a culture and a winning team, and she deserves the authority to coach. She has championship pedigree. She knows the league. She's not wrong for holding her star player accountable. But Caitlin Clark also holds an extraordinary amount of leverage because she is, in a very real sense, the engine driving the entire current era of WNBA growth. If the relationship between Clark and the Indiana coaching staff deteriorates, it doesn't just affect the Fever, it affects the league, it affects the sponsorship deals, it affects the broadcasting contracts that are about to be renegotiated. Everyone has an interest in this relationship working, which is exactly why so many cameras and so many writers are watching every interaction so carefully. The stakes are not small. And that's why this Phoenix game incident matters so much, regardless of which version of the story turns out to be true. If it really was just a back injury, then the Fever botched the public communication of it in a way that has created weeks of unnecessary speculation. If it was a coach and player conflict that got papered over with a medical explanation, then the trust between the organization, its fans, and its biggest star is on shakier ground than anyone wants to admit. Either way, the organization needs to clean up how it handles these moments, because the next time something like this happens, and there will be a next time in a long season, the room for benefit of the doubt is going to be even smaller. So where does this leave us heading into the back half of the schedule? It leaves us with a Fever team that's 10-8, that just lost a series of close games, and that's now without its franchise player for at least one game, with no clear timeline. It leaves us with a coach who's publicly defending her star to officials, while privately, according to speculation, getting frustrated with that same star in real time on the bench. It leaves us with a player who has a documented back issue, but also, reportedly, a documented pattern of friction with the coaching staff that her own body language keeps confirming on national television. And it leaves us with a fan base that's been told one thing while watching another, and that is starting to demand a better explanation. The smartest people watching this season are saying the same thing in different words. The Fever organization, the coaching staff, and Caitlin Clark herself need to sit in a room and figure out how they want to present a unified front, because the current approach isn't working. The eyeball test keeps breaking the official narrative, and in 2026, when every fan has access to slow-motion replays, isolated camera angles, and 1,000 voices on social media ready to dissect every frame, you cannot survive a season of these incidents with a communication strategy that doesn't match what people are seeing with their own eyes. Whatever actually happened on that Phoenix night, whether it was purely a back injury, purely a coach-player blow-up, or some combination of both, one thing is clear:
The Indiana Fever are at a crossroads they didn't expect to be standing at this early in the season. They have the biggest star in their sport. They have a coach with the credentials to win. They have a fan base that's grown beyond anything the franchise has ever experienced. And right now, all of that is being held together by duct tape and press conference talking points. That works for a while. It does not work forever. The next few weeks are going to tell us whether this team can build the kind of internal trust that championship contenders run on, or whether the cracks we just watched open up on national television are going to keep growing until something gives. Because in pro sports, when a star player walks off the floor alone in a tied game and the only sound you hear is silence from the broadcast booth, that's never just about a sore back. That's always about something deeper. And what's deeper here might end up defining the entire trajectory of the Indiana Fever season.